I was just reflecting on the momentous change that is removing the treaty requirement from the obligation on state school boards. Taxpayers don't fund education for adult political purposes, they fund it for children's education. And I think it's fair to say that there's enough parents out there who are tired of feeling like their kid's school has become an eternal marae visit. It is possible to respect the Māori language and culture without artificially inserting it into every aspect of life with a karakia before each lesson or Māori words through their entire maths lesson. These things are actually doing more damage to the relationship and respect for the culture than good, and I think taking those requirements out of the law so that schools can choose to teach Mataranga Māori, Tikanga Māori, Te Reo Māori if their community wants it, but not engineering it on the whole country is a massive step forward.
How are you to determine, though, what is the right amount of reo or the right amount of karakia to be used in schools?
Well, the whole point is that it's up to the boards. We're not requiring them to teach in a certain way. So I'm actually saying let's end the culture. We'll get the decision making away from politicians, put it back with school boards and communities, as has always been the intention. And there'll be some people who want bilingual, that's fine. There'll be some people who want full Māori immersion, good for them. But there's also people that want different choices, and they equally should be able to choose what they want.
Under this change, schools could choose to do none.
Well, if it's not important to you, you shouldn't have to. I mean, the idea that people should be compelled to think in a certain way for their own good, that's one of the things we're trying to stop in a free society.
And is that appropriate, given that, like Mani was saying, that schools are Crown entities and that there is a Crown Māori?
No, I'm sorry. Schools are there to serve the students. They're not there to serve your or anyone else's political purposes. So you might have a view that we should all think a certain way, but actually schools are run by communities. If the parents and the community don't want it, they shouldn't be forced to do it for someone else's purpose.
What
Very
about
simple.
prayers and stuff? Will you stop schools from forcing prayers onto people?
Well, New Zealand has a long history of allowing religious independence and tolerance. So, for example, if you're at a school that has religious lessons, you're allowed to opt out of that, and I believe that should always be the case. I wouldn't support a school, a state school at least, that compelled students to pray in any language. New Zealand's history of this goes back to the 1870s.
On the treaty obligations clauses on, obligations on schools, question: why was this why is this being done now through this amendment rather than as part of that broader treaty principles review process?
That's ultimately a decision for Erica Stanford. She's the minister and shepherding the legislation through. There was a suggestion back in July that the wider treaty principles review would do it. Erica's chosen to do it now, and I fully support that. I think it's one of the best things that we can do, along with getting academic achievement to be the paramount goal of schools and putting attendance in there. The transformation is from culture wars and identity politics to getting kids to school and excelling academically. That is a massive shift for New Zealand and a massive investment in our future.
And you've obviously spoken about the feedback or the comments that you've had from parents who aren't happy with the amount of te reo and mātauranga Māori and things that are taught in schools. Have you, what kind of consultation, if you know, has been done around this change across the board, or have you kind of relied on the feedback that has come to you?
Well, I as a politician listen to New Zealanders, that's my job. In terms of consultation, it's pretty simple. Nothing's been taken away from anybody. You can still do whatever you like, you're just not compelled to do certain things, and that's a big improvement. In a free society, all New Zealanders should be able to self-determine. Yeah, New Zealand is not a giant school camp, right? Like, we're actually a nation of adults who have limited time on earth and the right to make the most of it so long as it's not harming anyone else. It's when the government comes along and tries to restrict your freedom, that's when things like the regulatory standards bill are required.
So you don't think a select committee process is a need when there's legislative change that gives people, in your words, more freedom?
Well, it's not in my words, it's just, is the government putting in place laws that restrict what you can do? Because remember, the law in a free society says you can do anything you like unless explicitly restricted, not the other way around. That's how they do it in, say, communist China. In my view, it's critical that we start with freedom as the assumption. If you want to restrict that, that's when you've got to consult and justify.
Hey, what did you mean by calling Te Pāti Māori kūpapa this morning?
Well, kūpapa is an old word for traitors and people that you can't quite trust. Kaupapa is what a political party should have, a policy program and an agenda to make the world a better place. Just seems to me Te Pāti Māori right now have a lot more kūpapa than kaupapa.
Do you think that they're traitors to Māori?
Certainly traitors to each other, and they're all saying that themselves. Don't need me involved.
What do you make of the unemployment numbers?
Well, clearly remains a challenging time for a lot of people. A lot of people have been anxious about losing jobs. However, I note that going from 5.2 to 5.3, that feels like a flat bottom. Meanwhile, you hear people saying they believe a recovery is beginning, and so I think it needs to be acknowledged, but there's also signs of hope out there.
This is as bad as it's going to get, you reckon?
Look, it's always possible that in another quarter it could be down another fraction before it goes up, but it doesn't feel like it's going to get dramatically worse. If anything, it feels like it's going to get better. I'll just give you one example. I was at McDonald's the other day. I was talking to someone. I said, "What do you do?" They said, "I'm a accountant in Taihape." I said, "Oh, yeah, so all your clients must be farmers. How are they going?" And he said, "Look, it's interesting. They're getting good meat prices, sheep and beef in that part of the country, but they're not actually spending. They're doing deferred maintenance. They're shoring up their bank balance. They got run down through COVID, run down through bad prices, run down through the recession. Now they're just steadying themselves up, getting ready for a recovery." And I suspect there'll be a lot of that around the country.
How concerned are you about the state of negotiations for an Indian FTA?
Look, I'm not concerned at all. I know that Todd McClay has worked very hard. He's been up and down. He's going to have some incredible air miles. He even went over to New Delhi just for dinner. That's how hard he's worked on building that relationship. Sometimes it's darkest before dawn with these negotiations, but I'm confident we'll get there because it's in both countries' best interests.
There's been criticism, pushback from some around the changes being made to the Zero Carbon Act and the government's plans for climate policy. What's your response to that, and why has the government taken this route?
Look, we're doing a few things. First of all, we're acknowledging that there are other ways to do carbon removals than planting trees. Sure, trees are great at soaking up carbon, but they also have a lot of other impacts, particularly in rural New Zealand. There may be other ways that you can reduce carbon or suck up carbon, sequester carbon. We should be open to those kinds of technologies, so that I think is a really big positive. We're taking the ETS reviews down to once every 2 years. One thing about any kind of market is people want certainty and stability, so again, I actually think that's a really positive thing because you're not going to make a big change every year, so let's give people more certainty. So yeah, there'll be people that try and criticise reflexively, but I'm not seeing why this is a step backwards.
What's the government working on in regards to homelessness in Auckland CBD?
Well, the critical thing is making it easier to build more homes. We're taking homes that are in expensive areas that actually don't hold many people, have the wrong number of bedrooms, and we're investing in homes, and particularly in community housing providers, that are in the right places with the right number of bedrooms for the right people. That means that you have fewer people on waiting lists. Remember, we've got up to 25,000 people on the waiting list for Housing New Zealand under the previous government. We've actually got that down. So, the key issue for homeless people is a home and the support services that surround that, and Chris Bishop's work and Tama Potaka's work is delivering on that.
Do you support a fireworks ban?
Look, I'm an animal lover, but I also love the Kiwi childhood. Most of the fun stuff's already been banned. Do we really want to take that away from them too?
We think that it was fun as kids because we didn't really understand some of those impacts, like the harm done to animals.
No, I think they were just happier and simpler times.
The government books today show that corporate tax is lower, health expenses are rising. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what we see is that the government has stayed within its spending limits. Tax has actually been slightly lower, so we've taken less money out of the economy. We've managed our spending carefully. I would rather we were shrinking the deficit faster, but altogether it shows that the government is being very cautious and very careful through difficult times. That's exactly what New Zealand needs. We cannot afford another blowout because that means inflation, that means high interest rates, it means all the misery and the loss of jobs that we're still dealing with from last time we had an irresponsible spending government.
Labor has announced a new policy today to expand free eligibility for cervical screening. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I think it's a good idea to get cervical screening. There's no question about that, but there are also different likelihoods of developing cervical cancer at different ages and stages of life. And so if you spend more money on expanding screening to an age group where maybe you don't actually have a high chance of getting it, remember, we're taking that money away from other things like treating people who do test positive now. So all I would say to them is, look, I don't think that these kinds of decisions should be made as bumper stickers in political campaigns. That's why I support the Firework model. Let the experts make the decisions like that.
What do you make of the overall policy of creating a card, a single card which has all your medical information on it? You can always use to get a test or get a GP visit. Absent the funding question, just having a single card.
Look, again, I'm a politician too. I can see why they're doing it for political communication. But the serious challenge with health is actually getting into a GP. That's why we just increased capitation funding by 16% at the end of June. People actually need to get an appointment. Having a card, well, it sounds good, but if you don't fix what really matters, your card might be declined.
Seymour, do you see a case for reforming the Harmful Digital Communications Act following the revelations yesterday?
Well, I voted against that act alone when it came out in 2016. I've always believed it's wrong to criminalise people for opinions. So yes, I do, having seen it be weaponised the way it was and the way it's been weaponised against journalists in the Chinese media in New Zealand recently. Yes, I've long thought there's a case for reforming it.
Can you explain how you believe it was weaponised?
Well, first of all, there's been widespread reporting recently of how a complaint under the Harmful Digital Communications Act was used by people who were frankly trying to cover up much worse crimes. Secondly, in the case of Auckland reporting, you've seen Portia Mao, the Chinese journalist, have it weaponised against her for criticising the Chinese government, and frankly that's the kind of behaviour that belongs in China, not in New Zealand. We don't want it imported here.
Does Andrew Costa have to go?
Well, Andrew Costa is an employee. He's got an employment relationship and he's got rights to due process. So I'm not going to jump in boots and all. I tell you what I really think about him, but I don't think that's going to help.
Do charges need to be laid for New Zealand to regain its kind of anti-corruption reputation here? Charges need to be laid against any of the other policemen?
Look, again, if you want to uphold New Zealand's anti-corruption reputation, you don't want a minister telling the police which charges to lay. But what I would just make at one point, besides the woman at the centre of this, it's critical that victims and complainants feel they can trust the police in this country. Restoring the trust in the police has to be the main objective. That's why the government is going to strengthen the IPCA. And also just make the point for the average beat cop out there, in my experience, are salt of the earth great New Zealanders. They don't deserve to be dragged down by this behaviour at the top that just makes you angrier and angrier the more you hear how people in trusted positions abuse their power. Hey folks, it's a great day for it with a 20-year campaign to pass the Regulatory Standards Bill expected to come to fruition this afternoon. For a long time, politicians have passed laws while hiding the true costs on New Zealanders and their property. That will end with the Regulatory Standards Bill. If you want to pass a law, politicians will have to show the costs they put onto New Zealanders. For example, the earthquake laws put billions of dollars, bankrupted people, and yet we now know that those laws weren't really necessary. That kind of reckless lawmaking and hiding of costs will end, and New Zealand will be a much wealthier place and also a much more respectful place, because if you've got a project politically that puts a lot of cost onto other people, you're going to have to at least acknowledge that you're putting a cost onto someone, and that I think is a step towards being a more civilised society.
On the school attendance data, can you explain why you think it's partly to blame on the strikes?
Well, we were actually on track to do better than last year until the last week when teachers were on rolling strikes all week. I can't imagine that a teacher being away on Thursday wouldn't have meant that some of the students decided to take an early holiday on the Friday, where 200,000 students did not attend. It was also the worst term for winter illness since term 2 2022, when less than 40% of students attended regularly. We still got over 50% in term 3 this year, so we are doing a lot better even with record illness. But the reason we didn't do even better than last year, in my opinion, is because we had rolling teacher strikes in the last week of term, and one of the worst last weeks of term around.
Were words for the new independent MPs? Have you been asked about Takata and Maria Minu now being independent MPs?
I have zero words or advice for them. They've become a joke and completely irrelevant. They've let down the people that they represent, and that's that.
Those two, or the party? Or?
Well, all six of them in their what 3 different respective entities they now have.
Is that and the two in the middle as well?
Oh, look, I honestly don't have the energy to talk about Te Pāti Māori. We've got much more important things to fix in this country that really matter.
Actually, could we get a comment on the new record set for New Zealanders leaving the country? Does this worry you?
Yeah, it worries me enormously. I just make the point, before people try and politicise it, this trend began in 2021. It actually stabilised when the government changed. It's gone down a smidgen since we've been in government. The real challenge is how do we turn it around? That means that we need to ensure that we have good financial management in the government, low inflation, lower interest rate. That leads to jobs and growth and opportunity, and makes people want to come here and stay here. So, I wish there was a shortcut, but there's not. We are doing the things required to turn around a trend that actually started 2 years before we were elected.
Do you have the full backing of New Zealand First? Winston Peters said something following the return of the Select Committee report, which was, it's better than it was, but we'll fix it at the next election. Do you have any idea what he means by fix it, or why it's not fixed already?
No, you'd have to ask him what his thoughts are on that. What I do know is that it is a black letter commitment of our coalition. All 3 parties are committed to vote for it, and it is going to be an enormous step forward for New Zealand. I mean, we have the Reserve Bank Act, so we know politicians aren't inflating away the value of your dollar. We've got the Public Finance Act, so we know they're not racking up debt on your account. And we have the Bill of Rights to make sure that politicians aren't making laws that violate your basic freedoms. The Regulatory Standards Act from tonight will be there to ensure that politicians aren't taking away the value of your property or wasting your time with red tape that doesn't actually stack up.
And can I just ask about implementation as well? There have, throughout its journey thus far, there have been some, concerns raised by different departments around the amount of effort, administrative effort and burden and cost and things that might go into carrying out the requirements under it. When will it come into force? Do you think that everyone has the resources needed to comply with the new law?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's nearly $1 billion of policy advice given every year under any government, and they're seriously saying that they don't have the resource to ask what the impacts of their policies and laws on ordinary New Zealanders are. The real cost of regulation is the restrictions on New Zealanders wasting their time impairing their property. It's not the requirements for bureaucrats to actually be careful and transparent about the rules that they're putting onto all of us.
Has there been any discussion about whether one thing goes in order for this to come in? Like a department's going to have to make choices about.
Well, we're not doing a Donald Trump 1 rule out, 2 in, or 2 out, 1 in. But what it is going to do is make them periodically examine the law we have. Would we make it again today according to the principles of good regulation? I think that's really valuable.
In a nutshell, can you explain for someone who doesn't understand what it is, what the Regulatory Standards Bill will do for the everyday Kiwi?
When politicians make a law, they have to be honest about its impacts on you, and over time that means that politicians are going to make laws more carefully so your life's not tied up in red tape that restricts your time and your property.
Should parents be consulted on the content of sex ed? What's in those classes?
They should be. The question is whether that should occur at a national level or at a school board level. There's a bit of debate going on about to what extent should content and curriculum be created at the school level versus the national level. I think generally speaking, bringing some control back to central government is a good thing, because we've had very questionable curriculum for a long time, and our results have been going backwards in that period, and I would apply that principle to RSE as well.
You've publicly stated that you're bothered with the quote intolerant and bullying tone of schools that have declared that they will continue to uphold the treaty. What about their tone has given you that impression?
Well, they've got the choice to do whatever they want, but they seem to have a problem with respecting everyone else making that choice. They've just been given the freedom, and yet somehow they're angry about that, and it seems their anger is that they don't want other people to teach as they would like to teach. teach. These guys aren't being stopped from doing anything they want to do. What they are being asked to do is respect that other people might make different choices, and somehow they're angry about that.
There have been, about 500 schools so far that have, written letters publicly saying, that they want to uphold the treaty. Is your policy out of touch?
No, because there's 5 times more schools than that for a start. Second of all, they're actually following the law. If you think about it, the law requires them to express New Zealand's cultural diversity. It doesn't stop them from including the treaty in that. So they actually think that they're being rebels, but they're following the law. Where they would be breaking the law is if they fail to put educational attainment at the top of their priorities. The ACT Party campaigned for and won putting educational attainment as the paramount objective of school boards. That is the non-negotiable. If you want to talk about the Crown being a treaty partner, generations of failing young Māori children to have the basic skills to succeed in their lifetime, that is a failure of the treaty.
What did you make of the Supreme Court's decision yesterday on the Uber drivers?
Well, I respect the Supreme Court. They're there to interpret the law, and I don't criticise their decisions. What I will say is that Brooke van Velden is making sure that the gig economy is vibrant in New Zealand for people that want that choice by introducing a gateway test for people who are contractors, because contracting is a legitimate choice for a lot of people, and this government will uphold it.
If you don't find yourself back in government after next year's election, would that be it?
Look, I'm not even going to consider that possibility. You see these insane Green Party. Those guys have a right to their policies. What they don't have a right is to damage the international reputation of New Zealand by saying that they're going to rip up contracts that the government has issued. We must keep them out, so I'm not even considering that. It was bad enough when New Zealand First and National and the Greens banned future oil and gas exploration permits. That trashed our reputation. If you start ripping up consents that the government's already issued because you don't like them under your policy, you're trashing the reputation of New Zealand. The Green Party are actually terrorists in that sense, and because that's the kind of damage that they're doing to New Zealand's future.
Terrorists, that's a very strong word to use.
Well, they're people that are undermining the law in New Zealand, they're undermining trust in New Zealand, they're doing damage to our country in international eyes. You could call that terrorism if you like. It is actually something that is well outside the norms of politics in New Zealand. No one has said we're going to rip up contracts that you currently have.
There's been a petition handed over outside with the social media ban. Obviously, ACT doesn't support that for under 16-year-olds. How much of what's come out of that select committee inquiry are you hoping gets picked up from the regulations that Stan has spoken of?
Look, the problem is massive. Parents are hugely concerned about young people on social media, predatory behaviour, inappropriate content, addiction to doom scrolling. These are massive problems, but a ban is too simple as a remedy for that. I say listen to what the select committee finds from listening to the experts around the world. Watch how the ban goes in Australia. I suspect they're going to have a few practical problems, and then ask if this problem is worth solving, it's worth solving correctly, which is what I've been saying all along. Just banning certain platforms, at best you're going to push kids into worse parts of the internet.
There's an appetite in some quarters for a corporate manslaughter law. What is your party's position on that?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge those lost 10 years ago today in Pike River. I can understand the demand for that. However, I think you've got to be very, very cautious about making laws in response to tragic events. If people can set out exactly why this is a good idea, regardless of that tragedy, then you should look at it. I'm always worried when people make a law as a way of offering sympathy to people after a tragedy, even 10 years later.
Do you think that's why the health and safety changes in 2015, where they went wrong, is because they were responding to a tragedy?
Look, that's a very interesting question. I haven't really thought enough about that. What I do know is that the health and safety changes, as Brooke van Velden has reviewed them, actually made sense, but the government and the one after it didn't actually put in place the guidance. And what's happened as a result is that people are terrified of WorkSafe, who never tell you how to comply, but they'll come and whack you if you don't, even though you didn't know how to because they wouldn't tell you. So what Brooke Van Velden's doing is saying, well, WorkSafe's job is now to tell people how to be safe as well as punish people who are not safe. That missing piece for 10 years was, I think, the problem. Brooke Van Velden actually went around the country, listened to people in a whole lot of health and safety settings, and has put in a very practical solution. I'm very proud of her fixing what matters there.
Smoke-free 2025 goal set in 2010 was to get smoking down to 5% of the population, adult population. It isn't quite there. The 6.8% smoking is basically flat, vaping's going up. Was that goal ever kind of achievable?
Well, look, I've always said, the government has three basic jobs when it comes to smoking. Make sure people are aware of the dangers, make sure people don't put extra costs on the health system and take healthcare away from other people, and make sure that people don't blow smoke in each other's faces. Now, 1991, the Smoke Free Environments Act stopped people smoking in the workplace and elsewhere, so that's done. The taxes that smokers pay vastly outweigh any cost they put on the healthcare, so that's done. And everyone knows smoking is bad. So, as far as I'm concerned, the job's done. And rather than haranguing a bunch of people, it might be, whether we agree or not, the one thing that really is special to them that they want to do. Okay, look, I'm not here to judge people, right? I'm not here to force moral judgments on people. When you do that, you just have a really tired society.
What do you make of Winston Peters wanting to repeal the Regulatory Standards Act?
Well, it's pretty worrying because that's Labor's position. It sounds like he's getting ready to go with Labor again. For the best interests of New Zealand, we need to get on top of red tape and regulation. It's making us poorer, it's ruining people's lives, it's ruining our country, and the Regulatory Standards Act is there to do exactly that, cut the red tape long term.
Would be a bottom line for you in a future coalition?
Of course. I mean, we worked on this for 20 years because red tape is strangling our country, and the Regulatory Standards Act is the way to deal with it. The reason it annoys so many people, it makes it so much harder to pass rules that are poorly thought out, affect your property rights and tie up your time in red tape.
Why is the government pushing pause on puberty blockers?
Well, it's very simple. A lot of people are sensitive about this topic. But I firmly believe that children should be taught to value and love themselves for who they are, not be told that they need to change. That phenomenon over the last few years has been largely a social phenomenon, hence the exponential rise in diagnoses and prescription of puberty blockers. We've got the right balance by saying you can keep taking them if you're on them, but we're hitting pause on continuing to prescribe them until there's more evidence on what the long-term effects are, which is unclear.
Greens have called this an imported culture war. How do you respond to that?
Well, who imported it? I think they're importing it, frankly.